The new premium helicopter in War Thunder for Sweden is the Mi-28A. Let's check it out. This is... Okay, so elephant in the room. Sweden doesn't actually fly the Mi-28A in real life. The Mi-28 and the AH-64 both participated in an evaluation program put on by Sweden back in 1995. This was enough for the snail to give both helicopters to Sweden in the game, mostly just because Sweden hasn't been a very heavy user of combat helicopters, and they needed to fill out the helicopter tree. So, that said, the Mi-28 itself was originally developed in the Soviet Union back in the 1980s by the Mil Helicopter Design Bureau. The first flight of the original prototype was in 1982, but its development shifted to a bit of a lower priority project after the Ka-50 was selected to enter production. Further development took quite a while as requirements changed and the overall vision for the helicopter went through several iterations, and eventually in 1988, the refined Mi-28A took to the air. The program ended up being cancelled after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the prototypes were kept in flying condition. In 1995, Sweden reached out and leased one for about a month for the evaluation program I mentioned a minute ago. Their conclusions were that the Mi-28 had very accurate weapon systems, performed very well in poor weather, and would likely be pretty resistant to battle damage in field conditions. But they had reservations about the logistics infrastructure and felt that some of the electronics would need replacement or upgrades. In particular, the Mi-28A was not rated for combat operations at night, which was a serious point of contention for Sweden. The original Mi-28A version never entered service, but it did lead to the development of the Mi-28N, a heavily upgraded version, which we also have in the game under the Soviet tech tree. What we're looking at in the game is the Mi-28A, a premium helicopter in Rank 6, Battle Rating 10.0, available to Sweden. Unlike the first few helicopters in the Swedish tech tree, this is a dedicated attack helicopter. Its weapon system includes the CCIP for all of its weapons, a strong optical zoom, and an auto tracker. Importantly, the night vision goggles are only available to the pilot and they don't work in the gunner view. The Mi-28 also gets a radar warning receiver, laser warning receiver, and a healthy supply of countermeasures. The loadouts include a good mix of gun pods, unguided rockets, and anti-tank missiles. Now, it does have to be said that all of the Mi-28's weapons are very potent, and even its gun turret gets a respectable APDS ammo belt that can pop light or medium ground targets with a few seconds of sustained fire if you can get a good angle on them. The S8KO rockets are quite powerful and highly effective anti-tank weapons. With some helicopters, the cheap rocket pods are almost a throwaway weapon, but with these, it's totally viable to fly out early in a match for rocket attacks. The S13OF rockets are also pretty serious. You won't actually get to use these very often, because the spawn points that you need are going to make them really in the same loadouts as the Ataka missile we're going to talk about in a second, but the 10-kilogram warheads make these very effective at taking out light vehicles without even needing direct hits, and they can cause pretty serious damage even to heavier targets. Now, the primary weapon, of course, is going to be the 9M120 Ataka missile. This is a semi-active command line-of-sight weapon that works with the Mi-28's auto tracker. It has an effective range out past 5 kilometers, good armor penetration, and a 5-kilogram warhead. Oh, and you can take up to 16 of them at a time. Simply put, these things are crazy effective. The flight performance of the Mi-28A is rock solid. It has reasonable speed, great agility, and responsive controls. The helicopter is completely aerobatic if you need it to be, but it's worth mentioning that sometimes in hover mode it does seem to stutter a bit. That is, it won't really maintain an entirely stable hover, and it'll oscillate a little bit along its horizontal axis. It's not really a problem, but if you're trying to make some really precise rocket shots from a hover or something like that, it might matter for you. How you fly this one out in missions will probably depend on how many spawn points you can rack up. Now, the helicopter meta is still basically just hovering off past the edge of the battlefield, throwing anti-tank missiles at anything you can target. The Mi-28A can absolutely do that, and do it incredibly well with its huge supply of Ataka missiles at BR-10. But it's not exciting to watch, so I'm only showing a little bit of it in this review. If you're patient and selective with your shots, you can easily rack up some pretty good kill counts with this, using the standoff missile attacks. But it's not the only way to be effective with the Mi-28. Now, its unguided rockets are absolutely capable of taking out basically any potential targets, even if they might take a couple of hits. Doing rocket passes through the battlefield is definitely possible and viable, just remembering how vulnerable helicopters are to low-caliber gunfire from roof guns. And of course, the closer in you get, the easier it is for players in SPAA to just eat you. The good news is, the auto tracker works very well in the external view, so if you get bored with standoff missile attacks, you can even do flyby missile runs, taking out targets of opportunity as you go. The gun turret is also pretty effective, and I was honestly surprised at some of the targets I was able to pop with just a couple seconds of sustained fire. Visually, the Mi-28A, well, it's a really weird looking helicopter. I've always thought the front end kind of looks like a rat, and overall, it has a very short and wide kind of a profile. The skins are okay with your choice of like a Swedish or Soviet paint job, but overall, I can't say I especially like the visuals on this one. Now, landing the Mi-28A can actually be a little tricky. If you're accustomed to using hover mode, be aware that this one is pretty bad at canceling out horizontal velocity using War Thunder's hover autopilot. I found that the easiest way was just to manually spin around and pitch in the opposite direction with manual cyclic controls before trying to go into a hover. It has fixed wheels for landing gear, so make sure you're quick on the brakes, otherwise this one does like to roll around a bit. To close out on the Swedish Mi-28A. This helicopter is armed to the teeth with incredibly effective air-to-ground weapons. It has a generous supply of countermeasures. It's viable for almost any helicopter playstyle, and it has premium bonuses. However, it doesn't have any thermal sights, and it doesn't have any heat-seeking air-to-air missiles. The final verdict on the Mi-28A is that this thing feels a bit overpowered, and if you're patient enough using standoff missile attacks from a good position, you can dominate the battlefield with this thing. On the other hand, if you prefer the up-close, high-risk helicopter gameplay missions, the Mi-28 does those pretty well too. Overall, this thing is very well-rounded and can be highly effective at pretty much anything except for engaging fast jets. As always, thanks for watching.